Hello, I am Max and you're watching Cool Stuff in Weird Cars. In this video, we're finally having a full tour and review of my 2004 Dodge Intrepid SE. And this car only has 32,000 miles on it. It's not very high spec, but I figured it would be a very good opportunity to give you a look at what one of these cars looked like brand new, basically off the showroom floor. I'll go over the few options that this car did come with here in a second, but for some background, this car was my grandparents' car. Sadly, my grandpa passed away in 2006, just 3 years after buying this car, and it was driven very slightly from then until I got it earlier this year. And since I got it, I've been pretty much just working on getting it back to as close to factory spec as I possibly could, and just enjoying it and driving it here and there. And I think I've done a pretty good job at that. Other than a few dings and scratches here and there on the bumpers as well as the roof and the hood, this car is basically in perfect condition. And as you would expect with this car being such low mileage and being in the condition that it's in, it does actually have the factory window sticker here, which I will go through some of the options, or actually all of the options that it has real quick right now. And so the options that this car has are in fact the 16-inch alloy wheels, which I've been told are pretty much the same wheels as comes on the SXT trim of this car, a cargo net for the trunk, body side moldings, AM/FM radio with a disc player, the remote for the keyless entry, 8-way power driver seat, cruise control, and for some reason it says wheels 16-inch aluminum silver along with the wheels 16-inch aluminum one. There's nothing incredibly interesting about the key here. Unlike Doug DeMuro says, not all mid-2000s Chryslers came with two different colors of plastic on the key and the remote. But on the remote you have the unlock and lock buttons, as well as the trunk popper and a panic button down below. This Intrepid is finished in the exterior color known as graphite metallic clear coat. And moving on in here, the interior is dark slate gray cloth. I'll get into it more in depth later on in the video, but these Intrepids have huge interiors, as well as the Concords, 300Ms, New Yorkers, every other LH car that there was. That was due to the design of the car, and it makes it pretty useful. The door panels here are nicely laid out, and there's also some padding here on top and on the armrest right there. You have the door pull, the electric lock switch, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later in the video, but because of the fact that Chrysler was running out of money, they started doing cost-cutting measures throughout these cars, and one of them was removing the little graphic that says that this is the lock button. There should be a graphic right here if this was a 2000 or 2001 model year car or earlier, but the 2003 and 2004s do not have that. Power mirror switch up in front of that, power windows down below, with a automatic down driver's side and the window lock in front of that. Speaker and a little storage area down below that. And you do get a nice reflector here on the door, just so if anybody is coming up on you and you have your door open, they can see it. I'll mention it more later in the video, but this car has a strange lack of badging on it. Usually cars on their sills here will have a manufacturer or a model name plate. This car has literally nothing. It's just a plastic piece that runs from front to back. Maybe if you got a higher end car like a 300M you would, but this one is not, it doesn't have anything. As I mentioned, the driver's seat is powered. The interior is actually pretty nicely laid out, very simple. Of course, the only way you could get Intrepids and other LH cars was an automatic. And as you can tell up there, this car has 32,021 miles on it as of this recording date. And so we'll take the key. And let's fire it up. Being that this car does have such low mileage, it runs like it's brand new still. And so we'll shut the door real quick. And we'll check out the rest of the interior. Starting over on the left over here, you do have a vent up here, as well as your headlight controls, gauge dimmer, and your turn signal stalk over here, which also has your wipers on it. Now, a common theme with this video is going to be build quality. These cars are not known for it, and even though this car has such low mileage and has barely been used, there's a couple of ways you can definitely tell that it doesn't quite have the build quality as other cars had of the time, and especially now. One of those is that I was cleaning this stock off, as you could tell, and there's a little graphic here saying that you push in on the end of this for the washer, which makes sense. But the problem is that that little graphic got wiped off with like one wipe from a cleaning cloth. Everything else stayed because I didn't quite go as hard on everything else, but I was just surprised that it rubbed off that easily. Do get a nice 4-spoke steering wheel with cruise control on the other side. As I mentioned, that was an option on this car. Nice gauge cluster, fuel gauge on the left, tachometer with your gear in the bottom, speedometer, as well as your temperature gauge on the far right. Of course, if you hit this little, this little guy right here, you do get your trip odometer as well. There's nothing really on the right side of the steering wheel at all. This is where your traction control off button would go if this car had traction control. A couple vents here in the middle, climate control down below that. Very simple and easy to use. Just a couple knobs, temperature, fan speed, and where you want it. AC button, as well as your rear defrost on the right side there. And the radio down below that. This radio is basically what you would find in pretty much any Chrysler product from the early 2000s and the late 90s. It's very simple to use. Your volume's here, seek, FM, AM, you set your clock over there, and you have your equalizer here, fade and balance, as well as your presets down below. It does have a single CD player. You could get an option of a multi-disc, like a 6 CD changer, and that would go down below. This car does not have that. There's just a cubby hole down there. Go ahead and turn that off. Down below that, you do have an ashtray, which is not really an ashtray in this car because this car was not equipped with a smoker package. So I'll go ahead and move this out of the way. As you can tell, there's just a little cap here that covers your power outlet, and you can't actually take out this ashtray area. It's more of just a little storage area. Behind that, you do have the automatic shifter. This car was equipped with a 4-speed automatic transmission, the 42RE as it's known as, and this one works fine. This one has some weird stuff with it, or this transmission itself. You know notice how it goes from drive to 3 to low. It doesn't really act like a normal transmission whenever you put it in the 3. It kind of like downshifts to, I guess, engine brake the car. It's kind of strange, but it works. You could get these with the auto stick, where you bring it all the way back and go right to left to shift up and down, but this car does not have that option. I don't think any of the 2.7 liter Chryslers had it, but this works as it is. Cup holders back behind that, and a center console, which has a little bit of space, not a whole lot. Down below there is an electric trunk popper, as well as your emergency brake and your hood release. Up above you do get a mainly dimming rearview mirror and 2 different map lights. And so we'll go ahead and shut it off, and we'll check out the outside. The Dodge Intrepid was first introduced for the 1993 model year and was one of the cab-forward cars that Chrysler was making. Basically what cab-forward means is that you have the entire cab, or so you call it, of the car, and that's pushed forward up closer to the front wheels. You can tell the front wheel is almost aligned with the bottom of the windshield, which that just gave the inside of the car a ton of room, which of course I'll show off more during this video. And it gave it kind of a unique style. The second generation was introduced for 1998 and ran all the way up until 2004. One thing I find interesting on this is that this is as far as the rear windows go down. They do not go down any more than that. And it's not because of like child safety or anything like that. It's simply because the way the door is shaped, it can't go down any further. Or they'd have to make the rear window smaller, which they didn't want to do. As I said, this one does have these 16-inch alloy wheels, which these are also the same wheels you'd find on like the SXT and a few other trim models of the Intrepid. And you had the SE, ES, and SXT in 2004, the SE being the base model. As I mentioned, there's body side moldings on the options list, which I believe are these things that go all the way along the car from the back to the front, two different pieces on two different doors on either side. I don't know why those would be an option, but they were, and they're here now. And speaking of which, here in the front, you'll notice there's just a lack of anything, a badge or anything to do with the car. And basically, that's also another thing with cost cutting that Chrysler did in 2003 for these cars. They thought that removing the script, which on Chrysler's it said Chrysler, on the Dodge Intrepid it said Dodge right here. They thought that that would just save them money. I guess it did, but I don't know. It looks kind of bare now, to say the least. These Intrepids often get called the jelly beans because of the way the front end is styled. I kind of like it myself, with the long headlights, the sloping hood, and the interesting grills on the bottom. Of course, you got a different front bumper if you got the fog lights, but this car does not have fog lights. And if I can have a second to talk about these headlights, they suck. They are very dim in the dark, which surprises me considering how clean these headlights are. Most of the time on these cars, you find the headlights are extremely faded or just completely opaque. But because of this car sitting underneath a carport for pretty much all its life, these are in basically perfect condition. And speaking of build quality, I don't really have any issues here with the front of the car, except for the fact that these little Dodge emblems in the middle of the hood here tend to fall off apparently. On most of these cars you won't find them with one because they've already fallen off. This one's not in great condition, but it's still there. I definitely prefer this generation of the Intrepid compared to the previous generation, at least for the roofline. The first generation was very squared off and very flat. I feel like the roundness that this one has definitely adds to the little bit of style that this car has. And of course, in case you were wondering, all of the LH cars from the Intrepid to the 300M were all front-wheel drive. Around the back of this car is actually where I noticed most of the build quality issues that I've seen. Specifically, this body line, right on top of the third brake light there. It's thin on either side and large in the middle. I don't think anything would have happened to it to make it do that, but it's definitely like that. Also, you can notice on the weather stripping that goes all the way around this rear window, there's like little spots on it that for the life of me I cannot get off. And considering this car sat underneath a carport its entire life, I have no clue of what that would have been from, unless water just somehow got up on there and ended up staining it. Otherwise it's not terrible, but this car does seem prone to scratching. If you look, there's scratches everywhere on the rear bumper back here. Sure, they may have been actually from somebody hitting something or running into something in the garage or under the carport or wherever, but there's just so many. And there's scratches on the roof, there's scratches on the front bumper, there's scratches on the sides. So I don't really know if that's just build quality or if it actually got hit hard enough to do that. In the back here, sadly, this Intrepid does not have the spoiler option, which I think looks a lot better on these cars than no spoiler, but the trunk isn't very rounded off, so that helps out a lot. And another thing, this third brake light, most of the time you see these are out because they're in the trunk. There's actually two different light bulbs, one on either side, and what happens is people slam the trunk on these and it just destroys all the wiring that goes all the way to the third brake light. But luckily, this car has probably had its trunk opened a very small amount of times, so it still works fine. The rear window is nice and big, very easy to see out of. You have your gas cap over here. Another interesting thing back here is that all of the Intrepids, all the way from 1993 to 2004, always had a single exit exhaust. The most high performance version of the Intrepid was the RT in 2001 to 2000, or 2000 to 2002, and it still only had one exhaust tip. It had a chrome tip on it, but it was only one. And just continuing down the side here, there's another weird thing, that these black pieces on the front and back door, they have like wear to them. I have no clue of how that happened, since this car's barely been in the sun its entire life. But they're not in fantastic shape, and they tend to attract fingerprints apparently, considering I can see a whole bunch of my fingerprints on top there. It's got some more scratches here by the door handle, a little bit below actually. I don't think it's because of the keyhole. Very small mirrors. These aren't the best mirrors by any means, but they do work. But I honestly like the styling of these cars. The Intrepids are okay. I do like the 300M Specials, and the LHS and Concord don't look too bad, but their roofline kind of throws me off. I honestly think that the Intrepid has probably the best roofline of any of the cars, but I like all of them, honestly. I'd love to have one of each. And we'll pop the hood, and we'll open this to reveal the engine that everybody loves to hate. This is the 2.7 liter dual overhead cam 24 valve V6 from Chrysler. And one of the most interesting parts about this car you'll be able to see now. Basically, even though this car is front wheel drive, it does have a transmission that goes up to the front wheels. The engine is actually longitudinal. It's not transverse like 99% of other front wheel drive cars, at least from the 80s until now. It's definitely a unique aspect, and I guess they did this due to the cab forward design or something caused them to think, hey, let's put the engine this way instead of this way. So that's pretty much that. The engine makes okay power, it makes about 200 horsepower and 200 foot-pounds of torque. It's not fast though. And these are known for many problems. They have sludge problems, they have water pump problems, they have timing chain problems, and pretty much anything you can possibly imagine, this engine probably has it and a problem. But this one's still running perfectly for me, so I'll just hold out for a little bit longer at least. And so we'll have a look at the passenger side. The doors do open and close very satisfyingly. They make a nice sound whenever they open and close, which is more than I can say about some GM cars from this time period. An interesting thing in the door is nothing really to do with the Intrepid, but more so to do with this car, or you can't see it. It has a bunch of these Missouri highway maps in it from like 2002 to 2008 basically. Because my grandpa liked driving places, but he always wanted to have a map with them. And back, you know, in the mid 2000s, you didn't really have a map on your phone easily. So he just carried these around. And I've just decided to keep them in this car right over here, because it's not really something I need to get rid of per se. It does say Intrepid here on the front. You do get a passenger side airbag, of course, glove box. Nothing really exciting in here, except for the fact that I found this. This is the original mirror switch piece. Of course, I found it underneath the driver's side floor mat, but oh well. It was missing a piece I needed anyway, so. But we'll go ahead and have a seat in here, which of course you tell for when I do the back seat section. I'm perfectly comfortable up here. It's very nice to be in this passenger seat. No vanity lights up here though, strangely enough, on either side. You do get a couple of vents, and that's about it. And finally, we'll check out the back seat. The doors open, seems like they open wide, but that's just because the door itself is incredibly wide. Do get a reflector back here as well, your power mirror switch, as well as I guess what would be an ashtray if you had the smoker package. And a decent amount of space. We'll go ahead and have a seat. And as you can tell, I have not moved the front seat at all from where I had it, and I have like 3 inches of space between my knees and the front seat. This car has a ton of space inside of it. and I really appreciate that. Oddly enough, you don't get any pockets on the back of these seats, either side. You do get vents back here, which you can control. You just flip the switch here, you turn them on and off. Simple as that. And you do get a coat hook right here, as well as a handle and a little switch for your light. And for those of you who may be wondering, you do get child seat anchors on the back there. No pass-through, no center console, no flipping the seat down. It's where it is. You cannot affect it. You can't fit 3 people back here, which is nice. And that's about it. And last but not least, we will be checking out the trunk, which, as I mentioned, there's a few ways to open it. You have the key, a button on the inside, or you can put it in the hole right here in the trunk. I'm gonna go ahead and use the key. You can just press the button and hold it, and it pops open. And this is where this car really shines. So you'll first off notice that there's a net back here. That is one of the options I was talking about in the beginning of the video. This is part of the preferred package. It's kind of nice. It just kind of helps things from moving around. You can also put stuff inside of it, and it'll hold it nice and tight. You do have a donut down below, but the real treat here is just how huge this trunk is. I don't know if you can see it at all. I'm gonna guess that you can, but there's like 4 feet of trunk in front of this net. The trunk is massive. As I said, there is no pass-through though, so sadly you can't just stick something absolutely huge in there. But I'll probably put up on the screen if I can find it. I'll put up the actual true size of the trunk, but I know it's massive because I was sitting in the back here with my legs stretched all the way out and I was barely touching the front of the trunk. It's crazy how big it is. Sadly, it does not have a liner to the trunk lid, but it does have a emergency pull here. Why did I pull that? Oh, there we go. And that'll be that for the trunk. And that's why the third brake lights get broken. Okay, and so now we're driving the 2004 Intrepid. As I'm currently driving this, it has 32,032 miles. Very nice number to end on here. But we'll take it through some twisties here real quick, because surprisingly, out of every road you could drive this car on, it's actually pretty competent with twisty roads. I have no clue why. The suspension it's not stiff, it's not super soft though, but the suspension handles it perfectly fine. This car weighs like 3,800 pounds, and it handles pretty good. There's one huge letdown for the driving experience of this car though. The one huge letdown is the transmission. So basically the shifter first off feels just flimsy. I'm not gonna lie to you, like it feels so plasticky. And then the fact that you can only go to first gear, and then the next notch up is first, second, and third gear. But as I mentioned, it has some weird function to it where it tries to engine brake, I guess you could call it. Because as soon as I get down to about 1,500 RPM in, say, third gear or second gear, it'll shift down to the gear before that. I'll try and keep my hand out of the way so you can hopefully see the tachometer. This thing does have a tilt steering wheel, by the way. I don't think I ever mentioned anything about that. Which I believe was an option, actually. So, speed limit went down 30. If I actually go down to 30, watch when I hit 1,500, it shifts down. As you can tell, my hand's not doing anything. And it's still in third according to the little gauge thing there. And now, I'll slow down a little bit more. Wait for it, and I'll get 1,500 again. Well, maybe it only does it between third and second, I guess, then. No clue of why it does that in the slightest. But then you also have drive and just drive as normal. And third is basically taking off overdrive. So, there's that, and also the fact that the transmission is just lazy. It doesn't know what gear it wants to be in. It doesn't know when to shift down. It doesn't know which gear to shift down into correctly. And there's no way you can really specifically tell it. I'm going to move this so it stops making noise. So it's an okay driving experience. This car is not powerful, it's not fast. It handles moderately good in my opinion, and it just it's a good highway car is what I would say, where you don't have to shift and you don't have to, the transmission doesn't have to work any harder than just getting into fourth gear and staying in fourth gear. That is the place where this car will actually do well. Climbing up this hill is 30, 35. It's not powerful at all. The gear ratios are, I mean, you can debate on whether they're good or not. They're okay for, again, highway driving. But, I mean, second gear is so long for whatever reason too. First gear is not incredibly long, but second gear is just ridiculously long. And again, that wouldn't really be a problem if you could specifically shift into second gear, but you can't. So you're relying on the transmission to try and figure out what it needs to do, which it doesn't know how to do it, and it's not a good combination. But otherwise, transmission aside, this car is actually pretty just, you know, nice and normal to drive. There's nothing crazy about it. My visibility is really good actually. The mirrors, as I mentioned in the earlier part, the mirrors are a little small, but my Lexus LS400 mirrors are smaller, I'm pretty sure, so they're not too bad. And otherwise, like, there's a decently big blind spot on the C-pillar there, but it's nothing, you know, major. It's nice and quiet in here until you hit it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it does not accelerate fast at all. I think this car would definitely be helped out by having the 3.5 instead of the 2.7. Everything is easy to read, easy to see, easy to access. You won't have any issues with controls or anything like that in this car. It's a very normal feeling car. Very basic feeling. But it's not a Camry, it's not a Ford Taurus from the early 2000s, which are just, there's one right there actually. Those are just the epitome of normal, I guess you could call it, without being mean. There's so many of those out here, but these cars, they're not as easy to come by as they once were. And that's specifically because of reliability. These things were driven into the ground by people who didn't have much money because they were doing lots of discounts on these in their last years. And they didn't make very many of them in like 2003 and 2004. And of course there was the aforementioned price or cost cutting as well as build quality issues. And the transmission is definitely a weak spot in these. The engine is also a weak spot, but I'd say the transmission is more so. But again, there's a lot of these out there with 200,000 miles on them. It's either A, people who just didn't care, or B, people who replaced engines and transmissions in them, or C, believe it or not, people that actually took really good care of these cars and they showed it. I've heard that if you just really stay on top of maintenance on these, they will go 200,000 miles. You'll definitely have to replace water pumps and alternators and, you know, everything kind of around the engine and valve cover gaskets and stuff like that. But it'll make it. It'll go 220, 230,000 miles. It's just you have to be ready to put in the work. And a lot of people who bought these cars were not ready for that. They were looking for something they could just not care about, like a Camry or a Taurus. And that's kind of saddening, just because that just shows how many people just didn't care. I wish people cared more, but you can't have everything, I guess. Yeah, it's nothing special. Nobody's gonna look at this car as they're driving down the road, unless somebody's like, wow, that's a clean Intrepid, because, you know, So far, I've yet to see an Intrepid on this drive that I've taken. I've seen multiple Tauruses and Camrys and Crown Vics and anything else, and this car is also a big car. The Taurus and the Camry are mid-size cars. And I mean, sure, there's like the Avalon, but this car is bigger dimensions-wise than my Lexus LS400 and Toyota Celsior now. Like, it's like a few inches wider and a few inches longer. It's at the same height as well, which is kind of crazy because this car seems so low slung, but it's actually not as much as you would think. And so we'll get on the highway here real quick. Yeah, the transmission just does not know which gear to shift to whenever you punch it, but it cruises down the highway just fine. I'll set the cruise control here if I remember how to. There we go. And we're at 72 miles per hour, and it's fairly quiet. There's a little bit of wind noise, but that's also probably because this door panel's been apart 10 times now, and there's a few little pieces of the film that goes in between the outside and inside it's missing and stuff like that. But road noise, surprisingly a lot of road noise. You can hear pretty much every little bump. It's not like super loud, but you can hear it, and I'm sure you can hear it in the camera too. I showed off the window sticker at the beginning of the video, and it said 21 city, 29 highway for miles per gallon. And I can honestly say that I've gotten, while I was driving it to work for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever when it was, back months and months ago, through rush hour traffic, 50 miles a day, I got like 22.5 miles per gallon, which is not bad at all. I did drive on the highway a little bit, sure, but those numbers aren't too far off from what this car will actually get. And that's the huge upside to having the 2.7 liter, is that it takes 87 octane gas, which I think premium is recommended on the 3.5s, but it actually gets really good gas mileage, which is nice because I've never owned another car that's gotten especially good gas mileage. My best was my Ranger that got like 24 on its absolute best day. But yeah, I think this car was definitely let down by the fact that it was front wheel drive. People didn't really care for front wheel drive all too much in a big car like this. They wanted a Crown Vic or a town car or whatever that was rear wheel drive. And I think the build quality issues also stunted its production numbers, but I think it's a decent car. It's decent enough for what I do, and I personally really like it. It's a good highway cruiser. That's basically the gist of this driving portion. Driving it every day through rush hour traffic is not going to be fun, and it's also probably going to brake a lot. But you cruise down the highway at 70, 75 miles per hour, it'll do that all day long, no problem. And so that will conclude this much overdue video overviewing my 2004 Dodge Intrepid SE. And if you'd like to check out all of my social media links, they are in the description below. You can check out my Twitter and stuff. Also, I have a Patreon. I don't know if many of you knew that, but I have a Patreon where I release videos a few days early on there, and you can check that out. It's simple, $2 a month, and you can get early access to all my videos that I upload. And if you'd like to send me a car to review and you're kind of close to St. Louis, send me an email. I posted a little picture at the beginning of this video. It's not that anymore. It is coolstuffweirdcars@gmail.com. Simple as that. Send me an email, location, car, whatever. I'd love to drive and review your car. So I think that'll just about conclude this. Thank you all so much for watching this video, and I shall see you in the next one.